May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings.
Okay. What is the meaning of being non-conflated or not mixing the location, time, and nature of something? For instance, the conceptual consciousness is conflated with regard to the location, time, and nature of its object. What does that mean? To be conflated, to be mixed up, or to mix up location, time, and nature, and not to do so. What does that mean?
What the direct means, it's always in relation to, like, it's always a certain place, a certain time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes.
Well, it's like the time is mixed, like it could be anytime or anywhere kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. 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 And the nature?
And the nature, not sure.
First, yeah, go ahead. Someone else? Yeah.
The object. The color, for example. Of the object.
The features, yeah, the characteristics, the features of the object, which are of one nature with the object or the same nature as the object. Yeah, exactly. So the conceptual mind is conflated when it comes to the location, time, and nature. Yutarajin Deva. Yeah. Yutarajin Deva means like being mixed, having location, time, and mixing the location, time, and nature, while a conceptual consciousness is unable to do so because, of course, all the different features appear together with it and they're very specific. All right. Does anyone remember being the same as the pot? Now taking the pot as the example, perceiving an eye, like an eye consciousness apprehending pot. And in that case, its main object, pot, being the same as its impermanence, for instance, as the impermanence of the pot, with regard to object, time, and nature. Do you remember what that means? Being the same in terms of object, time, and nature. Anyone? A vase and the impermanence of the vase. They're the same.
So if one,
Go ahead.
so being the same in terms of object, time, and nature. First, they're coexistent. So when one arises, the other arises, and one abides, the other abides, and when one ceases, the other one ceases. Then, if one is the appearing object of a particular direct perceiver, then the other must be an appearing object of that same direct perceiver. And then finally, if it is one entity with one of them, then it has to be one entity with the other one.
With the other one. I thought about this word coexistence. It's kind of a little, I mean, there is another term in Tibetan, and I remember the term coexistence is used for that. But it's coexistence kind of means to me that people exist in harmony with one another. So it doesn't just mean that two things exist together. So it's kind of a little bit, yeah. But anyway, the term is used for something that's called kyamnamjechik. So coexistence as in existing at the same time. But it's still correct to say that in this case here, arising and abiding and disintegration, since they happen for each of them are simultaneous. Therefore, yeah, coexistence, I guess, works. There's really no other short term. Okay. Great. So that's that. There was also a quote that last time I didn't recognize it. It's such a famous quote, really. It's on page, well, I don't know what page it's in your text. It says, given that the nature of the object is unitary and perceptible, what other portion of that object that was not already perceived could there be that is cognized by other valid cognitions? Do you remember that quote? It was on the last
Page 259.
259, page 259. Okay. Now, this is a really famous quote, which is basically saying that when a direct perceiver, when a direct perception realizes its object, so a single object, like a unitary or a particular object, then it completely perceives that object. So a direct perceiver, which is incontrovertible with regard to its object, it knows its object. There's nothing left in terms of the object itself. Now, when it comes to Vas, it completely knows Vas. Completely doesn't mean, of course, its impermanence and so forth, not all its attributes, but in order to be able to recognize Vas, it knows everything that it needs to know. And thus, there's nothing else, there's no other valid cognition that is needed that follows from that direct perception in order to recognize Vas or in order to know Vas. And then in the commentaries, then it goes on to say, well, in the case of a conceptual mind, if the impermanence of the Vas and all the other qualities were to appear to the conceptual mind, just as they appear to the direct perceiver apprehending the Vas, then it would know all these. It would know all these, and then you would have the fold of no other valid cognition being needed. Anyway, that's just part of that particular passage in the commentaries. It doesn't seem that the text really explains this. In a way, it's implied by explaining collective engager or engagement via affirmation. Anyway, so we got to page, well, it would be 260 then, if the way the pages are divided is the same. So we got to, when we have the conceptual cognition, the pot space, we're not apprehending anything than its space. When the mind focuses on simply a pot in general, which is a collection of parts, and thinks this is a pot, it evidently does not consider its individual parts and thinks this is its space and this is its belly. Okay. So, yeah, the same debate as we had before. Take the subject, or take the subject of conceptual consciousness apprehending Vas. It follows it only perceives Vas in general without perceiving the base and the belly. If you agree, well, then it follows that it doesn't realize, so it doesn't know the definition of Vas. It doesn't know bulbous, flat-based phenomenon able to perform the function of water because it doesn't realize any of these. Okay, so that's a little hard, a little difficult to answer. Okay, then the text goes on to read, thus, when conceptual cognitions engage an object, they do not engage it through a real object presenting an image of itself to the mind. Rather, they engage it by a process of subjective delineation. Delineation. What does delineation mean? It means to describe an object, to outline an object, to mark the limits of that object, which is fine when we talk about exclusion in terms of excluding anything that is a non-pot. But then there's also this process of subjective differentiation of the attributes. So it's not just about delineating the Vas, it's not just about understanding the difference between Vas and not Vas. It's also about eliminating or excluding all the other attributes that the mind is not focused on. That relates to also Maya's question yesterday. What is that eliminative process? What does it involve? I mean, just saying, and again, we discussed this yesterday, just saying it's a subjective delineation, well, that's true for an eye consciousness apprehending of Vas. It's also a subjective delineation. It apprehends everything that is not Vas. It apprehends Vas, and thereby knows the difference between, or knows that there's no common locus between Vas and non-Vas. There's nothing that is both a Vas and a non-Vas. That's what the eye consciousness apprehending Vas knows as well. In that way, there's also a subjective delineation. So you could always debate, what does it mean, like a subjective delineation? Does it only refer to negating everything that is non-Vas? Because there's more to it. And then it goes on to say, rather they engage it by the process of then it says they engage something. So conceptual consciousnesses, they engage something that is isolated from other features or just the attribute to which the mind is directed. They do not engage anything else. It's interesting because in Tibetan, it doesn't say that. It doesn't talk about subjective delineation, and it doesn't say isolated. The word is used later in Tibetan. It's not wrong. It's nice. I mean, it explains it quite nicely, but in Tibetan, it really says, therefore, when conceptual consciousnesses engage an object, they do not engage to the force of the object's actual presenting itself to the mind. So that's the same. Rather by attending to an object from the side of the cognizing mind itself. So it talks about attending to something, attending to an object. And they engage with whatever attribute is attended to or whatever the mind is directed toward, and do not engage anything other than that. In other words, the English also mentions subjective delineation, which the Tibetan doesn't. It doesn't even imply that really, but it's not wrong. It's a nice addition. And then the isolate, that's really important. They engage something that is isolated from other features. Isolated from other features in the sense here, what does isolate mean? Isolate from other features. What does that mean?
Take apart, to separate, yeah.
To separate. So to separate the vase from
It's from the image, from the to the totality of the representation, I imagine.
well, the vase. I mean, when you think of isolates, for instance, the vase is its own isolate. And then you have certain attributes of the vase. Are they also the isolates of the vase?
Yes.
Yes.
If take the subject, the impermanence of the vase, it follows it's the isolate of the vase.
Why?
No.
It follows it's not the isolate of the vase. Right. So here saying that they engage something that is isolated from other features points at the fact that the vase is perceived as different from all its features. So as isolated from its features. And this is where the isolate comes from, this idea of isolates. It comes from the conceptual mind. So whether something is an isolate of, I don't know, X, Y, and Z is determined by the conceptual mind apprehending it. Are you aware of that? Have you learned that before?
Yeah.
You have, okay. Yeah, so, pardon?
Well, I'm glad to be that it is specified now. I'm just
Okay, so I say again, so basically when we talk about phenomena being of one nature, as I mentioned before, we discussed this before, that is determined by the conceptual mind, by the direct perception, perceiving the two things that are of one nature. But determining whether two things have the same isolate or not, that is determined by the conceptual consciousness apprehending it. Right? So then when you take, for instance, a conceptual mind apprehending vase, the question whether the vase has the same isolate as its impermanence is answered by a conceptual mind apprehending vase, because the conceptual mind apprehending vase apprehends nothing but the vase itself, not the impermanence of the vase. Therefore, it isolates everything that is not vase, that is not one with vase, from everything else. And this way we come to know what are the isolates of vase and what that excludes. Right?
Okay. My meaning generality is related to the vase. So does that mean that the isolate of the vase for me is also the shape of the vase?
Say again, sorry, I couldn't hear that. I couldn't hear the beginning.
If the meaning generality for me of a vase is a image of a vase, right? That the shape of a vase is
Wait. The meaning generality of the vase is an image of the vase. No, it's just in the representation of the vase. Yeah, okay, if you want to say an image that is not the vase, like a permanent image of the vase. Yes, go ahead.
so in that sense, the isolate of the vase is the shape of the vase?
No, the isolate of the vase is vase itself. There's only one isolate of the vase, which is vase. Now,
But
when you
if vase for me now is shape.
well, vase is shape, but that doesn't mean that shape that is apprehended. I mean, vase is impermanent, but you don't apprehend impermanent.
Right.
Vase is shape, yes, but all you apprehend is vase. You apprehend a vase that happens to be a shape, but that happens to be a shape is not what you apprehend because it's not one with vase.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So your main object, let's put it that way, your main object is vase itself, right? Of course, it also apprehends vase which is impermanent, vase which is a shape. It apprehends that, but that's not its main object. Its main object is just vase. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. It's a little bit difficult because, for instance, does an I consciousness apprehend vase? You know the Tibetan word for vase? Humba. Humba is the Tibetan word for vase. So does the I consciousness apprehending, no, does the conceptual consciousness apprehending vase also apprehend Pumba?
Accept.
So it follows that vase and Pumba are one. I mean, is that the main object? Is the vase, is the Pumba the main object of the I consciousness apprehending vase?
Why?
Okay, it follows it is not the same. You see, the reason I'm saying this, is because there are scriptural quotations. There are some quotations that say a vase, and it actually uses the Sanskrit word, the Sanskrit for pot, which I think is gata, but I'm not sure. It doesn't sound familiar. Anyway, so the Sanskrit, you could say the Tibetan word for pot, that the Tibetan word for pot and the Sanskrit word for pot, there are one. So no, it uses the word itself. So let's say gata was the Sanskrit word for vase. Gata and Pumba are one isolate. But I don't agree with that. I have a sense I cannot take that literally. I wouldn't accept that literally. It is something that some people accept. Now, when you debate, some people would say, yes, whether you say bumba or whether you say pot, they are one isolate. But I'm thinking of how words appear differently to us. For instance, in French, the sun is male. In German, it's female. Now, in English, I don't know you have any sense of male or female, but when you say sun in German, there is kind of a sense of a female aspect of something female. The moon is male, and in French is the other way around, or in Spanish, for instance. So I'm wondering, because it appears differently to the mind, it appears differently to the conceptual consciousness. Can they really be one? So the different languages, the different words for one particular object. And it doesn't make sense to me. And everything else, I mean, you can use different words for a vase. You can use, sometimes one term has different synonyms, like has different, different names for the same object, and you wouldn't say that they are one isolate. So how come different words in different languages that means something quite different, I guess, also determined by the culture and so forth? How could there be one isolate? But the scriptures are quoted. The scriptures means there are certain quotes that are oftentimes accepted, certain citations, certain quotations that seem to suggest that they're one isolate. Yeah. Anyway, just wanted to.
Can we say that that it is like one meaning generality?
No, I don't think so. I don't think you can say it's one meaning generality, because if it were one meaning generality, then they would be one. So the meaning generality, if that's the main object, what is the main object is determined by what meaning generality appears to it. And in the case of Vas and Pumba, they have different meaning generalities, according to my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
But that's just my view. Some people may disagree. Based very much on, for instance, the example of the sun being male or female and so on. All right. Yeah. And then there's another quote from the Pramanavartika, from Dharmakirti's exposition of valid cognition, saying, the ascertainment and verbal expressions that serve to remove false superimpositions are as numerous as those superimpositions of false attributes. Hence, they have all distinct reference. I would translate this differently. The ascertainments and verbal expressions, so in other words, the conceptual consciousnesses and the words that exclude certain attributes are as numerous as those superimpositions of attributes. Hence, they all have distinct objects, I would say. So they have distinct objects because there are numerous different things that they, or superimpositions, wrong attribute or mistaken attributes that they exclude, that they extinguish. So, for instance, the being permanent, like in the case of the vase, the conceptual consciousness apprehending the impermanence of vase excludes the superimposition that the vase is permanent, and then the conceptual consciousness apprehending vase itself excludes the superimposition of non-vase, and so on. In that way, every conceptual consciousness excludes certain wrong views or certain superimpositions of particular attributes, being permanent, being not a product, being non-existence, and so forth. And so, because there's so many superimpositions, there are endless superimpositions, therefore there are endless conceptual consciousnesses and verbal expressions. That's what this quote is saying. In contrast, non-conceptual consciousnesses is the meaning of this verse just that I just gave. Is that the meaning that I just explained? Is that clear? Not really. So the ascertainment, so the conceptual minds and verbal expressions that exclude certain attributes are as numerous as those superimpositions of attributes. That's why they all have distinct objects. So in other words, there's so many superimpositions, usually when we say, for instance, the conceptual consciousness apprehending the impermanence of vase, which superimposition does it exclude? The permanence of vase. Or the conceptual consciousness apprehending the existence of vase, which superimposition does it exclude? The non-existence of vase.
Okay.
And then so in that way, they're like, every phenomenon has so many attributes, so many features. And in relation to that, you can have different conceptual consciousnesses that exclude certain superimpositions with regard to these attributes, that perceive the opposite of these attributes. So in the case of impermanence, perceiving it to be permanent. In the case of being a product, perceiving it to be a non-product. In the case of existence, perceiving it to be non-existent. So in the same way as every single phenomenon has so many different features and characteristics, there are endless phenomena with these endless different features and features and attributes. Therefore, there must be numerous conceptual consciousnesses, numerous words expressing exactly these attributes and thereby excluding the opposite of these attributes. Is it clear now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. In contrast, non-conceptual consciousnesses, such as sense consciousnesses, are said to engage their objects without differentiating their attributes. Generally speaking, when non-conceptual consciousnesses engage their objects, they engage through the object presenting an image of itself to consciousness, just as a reflection appears in a mirror. They do not engage in subjective delineation. Here in Tibetan, it says, actually, it doesn't say subjective delineation, it says Shemba, in conception. It doesn't engage in conceiving its object or analyzing it. That's what it literally says. So they do not engage in conceiving, in conception or analysis. Whatever object is engaged, I mean, subjective delineation is not wrong. I'm just saying, and for some reason the translators used a different word here than in the Tibetan. Whatever object is engaged, all the visible parts or qualities of the object are engaged. Engaged as in, like, at least they appear. They appear together with the main object, which is apprehended. This is known as engaging without differentiating the attributes. Exposition of valid cognition says, therefore all the qualities of a seen thing are seen. In Tibetan, it literally says, therefore by seeing a functioning thing, all its qualities are seen.
I'm sorry, I have another question. When we talk about the view of the perishable,
Collection.
Collection, are we talking about this? Is this applicable to this type of engaging without differentiating the attributes?
Okay, let me ask you, the view of the perishable attributes. Take the view of the perishable attributes. It follows it's a non-conceptual consciousness?
It can be.
Oh.
Oh, okay.
Right? Here we're talking about non-conceptual consciousnesses that engage with that. But the view of the perishable collection, I don't know, what do you call that? The perishable collection or the perishable aggregates?
Well, I think it's
which term do you use?
Aggregates actually, so it automatically it becomes conceptual.
Yes, absolutely right. Yeah. So that particular view. Geshe Thupten Jimba uses the expression identity view in his illuminating the intent, for instance, and in other books as well. So in here it's also called the identity view. Yeah, but literally it means, in Tibetan at least, the Sanskrit means something different. I think it's called Satkaya or something, but in Tibetan, yeah, it's Jigsogi Dawa, which literally means the view of the perishable collection. And that is a conceptual mind. What is it? What is the view of the perishable collection? What does it mean? What is it?
Viewing the aggregates as a self,
Yeah, I did
Which self?
the autonomous,
the permanence.
Pardon?
the autonomous self.
The autonomous self, the Sautrantika school, it would be a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. But is it just in general the self-sufficient, substantially existent self, or does it mean something specific?
I don't know.
Your own self. It always means your own self, not someone else's self, because you can also focus on another person and perceive their self-sufficient, substantially existent self, right? But when you talk about the perishable, the view of the perishable aggregates, it always refers to one's own self. In the Prasangika school, this is an important term, which in that school, it refers to the intrinsically existent self, but it refers to one's own self, as opposed to others' self. Just to put that out there, may be helpful at some point. And you can have, so self-grasping and the view of the perishable aggregates or the perishable collection, there are three possibilities. Whatever is the view of the perishable aggregate is grasping at the self, but grasping at it, or grasping at a self, but grasping at a self is not necessarily the view of the perishable aggregates, because focusing on another person's self and misperceiving it is still grasping at a self. Okay. So continue going back to this here. So this is a non-conceptual so we're talking about non-conceptual consciousnesses here. And as Dharmakirti says, by seeing a functioning thing, all its qualities are seen. Okay. All its qualities, of course, doesn't literally mean all its qualities. It doesn't mean in the case of a vase that it's smell, for instance, appears. But yeah, all the qualities that can appear to an eye consciousness, they are seen. Moreover, engaging by way of a linguistic convention is also characterized as an engagement via exclusion. In general, this term, linguistic convention, is mentioned frequently in texts on valid cognition, and they mean different things in different contexts. So in the text on valid cognition, which speak about linguistic convention, for instance, within the subdivision of name and linguistic convention. So the name of something, the linguistic convention. You remember some time back, we talked about when the name is first given, you use the word, the linguistic convention of that. It's introduced to you for the first time, you learn that this object, for instance, is called a vase or a table. And then later on, it becomes the term. Here they use the word name, but previously the word term was used. So it becomes the term for you. You get used to that this is the name or the term of that particular object. So in that context, linguistic convention is used, but it means something different in this particular context, name and linguistic convention. Then there's also applying a linguistic convention to an object. It's used like for the first time or in general talking about applying a linguistic convention and engaging an object through a linguistic convention. So that in the latter case, it means meaning generality. So in the context of explaining the theory of exclusion of other, a conceptual consciousness or a conceptual cognition that engages through a linguistic convention refers to a mind that extends out to its object through a process involving a universal that is dependent on linguistic conventions, a semantic content. And this is an engagement via exclusion.
Geshima,
Yes?
I have a question about the quote before this.
Yes.
Are they, when they say seen, do they mean with the eye consciousness, or do they just mean like perceived by one of the sense consciousnesses?
Well, seen actually means to appear. Means
So
to appear. So it can also, you can also use it for, I mean, it's more commonly used for the eye consciousness. In fact, most examples of sense consciousnesses are eye consciousnesses, right? Whenever you, I mean, very rarely, unless there's like a special need to mention an ear consciousness, for instance, they use the word eye consciousness. So in that context, with an ear consciousness, yes, you can also use the word tongwa. All that's weird, like an ear consciousness sees something. But as I said, I think yesterday, to see has different meanings. It can mean just to appear. And in this context, it means appear.
Thanks.
So you could say appear to, yeah, it appears to any sense consciousness.
Yeah, okay.
All the qualities. Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so then, yeah, as I just read, here in the context of the exclusion of other, or the exclusion of other means engagement via exclusion. We talk about a linguistic convention because the universal or the meaning generality is dependent also on linguistic conventions, and this is an engagement therefore via exclusion. Well, I don't think that's always true, that it's dependent on linguistic convention, because for those who don't know linguistic convention or haven't learned language yet, I wouldn't know how that is dependent on linguistic conventions. But if you say in general, well, yeah, then that's true. Conversely, a mind that engages by way of the object presenting an image of itself is an engagement via affirmation. Accordingly, engagement via exclusion and engagement via affirmation can be defined in the following manner. The definition of engagement via exclusion is to engage an object through differentiating its attributes. The definition of engagement via affirmation is to engage an object without differentiating its attributes. All right. So this is a different view to, for instance, Benjamin Darpa. In general, there are two things that engage via exclusion: language and cognition. Language, so words, intelligible sounds, expressive sounds, whatever you want to call it. So language that engages via exclusion encompasses all intelligible sound, Cognition that engages via exclusion encompasses all conceptual cognition. Yeah, so language and cognition. As to whether or not persons can be characterized as engaging via exclusion, there are two opinions. Yes, we heard already. Benjamin Tarba wouldn't agree. Wouldn't agree that a person is engaging by. I mean, a person engages via exclusion, but is not an engager via exclusion. It's not an engagement via exclusion. So would engage via exclusion, but it's not engagement via exclusion. That's a bit like saying a person realizes things conceptually and realizes things non-conceptually, but that doesn't make a person a conceptual cognition or a non-conceptual cognition. You see the difference? So conceptual cognition refers to the mind. Non-conceptual cognition refers to the mind. Engagement via exclusion refers to the mind. Engagement via affirmation refers to the mind. But that doesn't mean that a person doesn't engage via exclusion. So the person performs these actions, these functions, or these actions, but it doesn't make them that particular mind. But there are two opinions. Some would say that engager doesn't only refer to, in the case of like an affirmative engager, for instance, or call it a collective engager, doesn't necessarily refer to a person, to just a mind. It could also be a person. Okay. All non-conceptual consciousnesses are cognitions that engage via affirmation. All right. I had that before. Then it says, in brief, language and conceptual cognitions that engage through exclusion, through other exclusion. Exclusion and other exclusion just mean the same thing here. I mean, of course, if you exclude something, you always exclude something other. Through the force of desire. What does desire mean? What is desire?
Craving?
Pardon?
Is that the same as craving?
If it's the same as craving, if let's continue reading through this. So, in brief, language and conceptual cognitions that engage through exclusion, through other exclusion, through the force of desire, through categories, through universals, through differentiating the attributes, and so on, have much the same meaning. Well, it follows that the conceptual consciousness in a continuum of an arhat is not an engagement by exclusion, because there's no craving.
Motivation, maybe?
Yeah, in Tibetan, it doesn't say desire. I mean, it depends on how you interpret desire. I mean, desire in the form of just a wish to do so, and in that case, it would be, as Janine is saying, like a motivation. Or do you mean with desire, the afflictive kind of desire? Yeah, it just depends. Oftentimes, it's used as one of the afflictions, but
Is it attachment?
no. Like
Oh.
in Tibetan, you have different words. You have döcha, you have chakpa, and you have shencha. So döcha is usually used as afflictive desire. Chakpa can sometimes mean sexual desire, but not necessarily. And then shencha means attachment. But here it's döpa. Döpa means just wish. Döpa. In Tibetan, they say döpa. So the force of a wish, or you could say a motivation, or yeah. To the force of desire. But then the thing is, like, we've learned that an I consciousness apprehends certain things because there's the wish to do so. Remember? In this text in particular, it emphasized what do you want to see. If you see, like, I don't know, like a whole scene of a room, you won't be able to know everything simultaneously. It depends on what you want to see. So you could always debate through the force of desire. Well, it follows that an I consciousness apprehending a vase amidst a lot of other objects is an engagement via exclusion because it arises through the force of desire or wish. And again, craving, it couldn't mean craving because an arhat doesn't have craving. So I don't understand. I don't know this. I don't know why they included through the force of desire. I've certainly not seen it in the commentaries I studied. Anyway, and in Tibetan, it doesn't say through categories. That's not part of this list. It doesn't say through categories. It just says through desire, or actually for the force of wishes. Then it says through universals, through differentiating the attributes, and so on. They have much the same meaning. Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Do you need this?
No, this one over here. So they don't say it's mutually inclusive. So I guess there would instead of the author saying they're synonymous, they're saying they just have a similar meaning. So
Sorry,
then I guess
I can't hear. So could you take the yeah.
the writers aren't saying they're synonymous, right?
They're saying synonymous, have much the same meaning, it says. So they're synonymous, yes. Let me see how it's...
Same thing. In the
Where does
Tibetan, it says Dunjawa. So
Turndower. Let me just
not
check. Did you look it up? Does it say Turndower?
yeah, it says Dunjawa.
Turndower, yeah. So have a similar meaning. Yeah, but why would you just say, if you didn't mean they were synonymous, why would you say have a similar meaning? I mean, usually Turndower CAD, for instance, like impermanent and being a product, Turndowere, right? So you wouldn't cite it unless you wanted to say they have the same meaning. Just saying they're similar, why would you say that? Right?
Mhm.
But yeah, in a debate, you could say Turndaueres, and then, they have a similar meaning. And then you could argue, well, tell me the reason why this is cited here. Why is the similar meaning given if it's not the same meaning? What's the point of saying so? Yeah. But yeah, well observed. Yeah, that's good. If you see that you saw it, I didn't pay attention to the Turndauer. So have much the same meaning. That's a nice way of putting it in English. Likewise, minds that engage through establishing the object through an affirming image, that's also a really nice way of putting it, I think, through an affirming image. In that, like I said yesterday, when you perceive a vase, you don't perceive your main kind of perception is not of the opposite of not vase, which would be a non-affirmative. It would be like a negating kind of way of getting. No, it's like an affirmative way through an affirming image. Yeah, there are no negatives. So, for instance, when you look at the table and say, well, absence of elephant on the table, it doesn't appear to your mind. All that appears is that empty table. Nothing else does. So in that sense, you can conceptually know there is no elephant on that table. You could even implicitly know there's no elephant on that table. Could implicitly be known by that mind. However, it's nothing that appears to you. So a negative cannot appear to you, which is why this term is very nice. Through an affirming image, it's always an affirming image. Through the causal capacity. So we do use, sometimes people say negatives cannot be known. But for instance, we talk about remission in cancer, like when you know that someone is in remission when it comes to cancer. Again, it's not like this remission appears to your sense consciousnesses. However, we can know negatives, yet they do not appear to sense consciousnesses. I think that's probably what they mean. So they're not explicitly known. Through an affirming, yes? Any question?
Sorry.
Yes. Okay. Through the causal capacity of a real thing. Okay, so the real thing presents an image, and that's an affirming image, without depending on a linguistic convention, with a clearly appearing object, and without differentiating the attributes and so on, have much the same meaning. Okay. Again, through the causal capacity, without depending on yeah, here the second case, they're definitely synonymous. In the case of a direct perception of a pot, all the attributes based on the pot, such as produced, impermanent, and so on, appear and are engaged. Yeah, appear and are engaged. As like, not that they become the object of engagement, but it's through this appearance that the main object is engaged, or the main object is apprehended. But a conceptual cognition apprehending a pot, having made hair-splitting distinctions, it's literally saying in Tibetan, hair-splitting distinctions. So this is definitely a term you can translate here literally. Having made the hair-splitting distinctions among the pot's attributes, engages only one feature of the pot, such as the pot itself, isolated from what is not the pot. In this way, one should understand the natures and attributes of engagement by exclusion and engagement by affirmation. Engagement by exclusion, engagement by affirmation. Yeah, I guess that's clear. It's just saying the same thing again. That was explained before, just in a slightly different way. Exposition of valid cognition says, even when something has been directly perceived, or when something has been seen, directly perceive, whatever, the cognition immediately following that perception. So here it's a conceptual cognition, has a universal, has a meaning generality as its object. It is conceptual. As a cognition of an object that has not been superimposed with other attributes, it has as its object just that exclusion. So there's no superimposition with regard to other objects, other attributes that has to be eliminated. So it's only that particular object that is perceived, or that object that there's only one object excluded, which is not that which you're apprehending. Then also speaking of the contrary view, the same text says, for whom words denote through the capacity of reality and do not depend on a desire to express. All right, so this is talking about some non-Buddhist schools, for instance, the Mimamsakas. There is a philosophical school called the Mimamsakas. They accept the Vedas. Have you heard of the Vedas? It's said to be, it's traditionally known to be the oldest kind of ancient Sanskrit text that presents, well, ancient non-Buddhist knowledge, such as rituals and so forth. So the Mimamsakas, they were a school, for instance, they accepted the Vedas. They accepted the Vedas in the way that they were not limited. They were not exclusive sounds, or they were not engagers via exclusion. They could convey reality in exactly the right way. So there would be no exclusion. It would be able to convey something the way it is. And that's an interesting idea. It's not just, I don't think it's just the Vedas. I'm pretty sure that also there are other texts. For instance, I'm wondering about the Bible. Not that in Christianity these things are at all discussed, but I remember once reading something online. I was curious about Christianity to compare it to Buddhism, and I think I Googled, like, what is the proof for Jesus' resurrection in Christianity? And the only proof I found was it says so in the Bible. So saying because it says it there, that's why it must be true. But of course, we know from a Buddhist point of view, that's why the Buddha's words cannot serve as a correct reason. It's not a correct reason to say take the subject, take the vase. It follows it's impermanent because the Buddha said it's impermanent. You're not going to realize impermanence on the basis of that, simply because the word never expresses the actual thing. Therefore, what you need is an understanding of, for instance, being momentary, or an understanding of being a product. Based on those words, you develop an understanding. And once you've developed that understanding, you can use it as a reason to then establish that, for instance, a vase is impermanent. But then what it said in the Bible, I don't know about other religions, but I'm pretty sure if you explained it to someone, I don't know, every Christian would agree with that. Every Christian scholar would agree with that. But I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of them would say, no, this is the word of Jesus, and it can convey exactly this to you, and you'll understand it. This is similar to the Vedas. So the Vedas are said to be, they denote through the capacity of reality. So it's kind of like a direct perception. It's through reality itself. That's what it expresses, exactly the way it exists. And it does not depend on a desire to express something. So in other words, it doesn't depend on the meaning generality. Okay. So the explanation of many points related to linguistic reference by Buddhist masters can be understood on the basis of this view that language and conceptual cognitions engage their object through exclusion. For example, this is now again the Buddhist view, having applied the linguistic convention cow to a white cow's assembled conglomeration of a hump, julep, and so on. A conglomeration. I mean, it's basically saying the parts, the coming together of particular parts. So you see a white cow, and you see certain characteristics such as a hump, a julep. You know what that means, right? The hump, the julep, yeah, the hump, and so on. okay, having seen a white cow with all these characteristics, then when one later sees a black cow, again with a hump, a julep, and so on, a cognition of the universal thinking, this is a cow, arises naturally. So a cognition of the universal thinking, this is a cow, arises naturally. The universal, I don't know why they use the word universal. The general, like of the cognition of the generality, this is a cow, arises naturally. This is in contrast to the explanation of the non-Buddhist Vaisheshika school, which maintains this is possible because those two cows are pervaded by an objectively distinct universal cowhood, a permanent entity that is established altogether separately from the two particular cows. You see, I'm pretty sure, of course, the whole thing of universal, that the translators have chosen the word universal to replace generality. So just say universal in all cases. In Tibetan, it's ji, 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 which ji actually has the meaning of general. Jidang, when you say jidang, it means in general. So it actually means much more general, I guess, the way we use it in English, like in general, for instance. But the thing is, generality also can connote something subjective, while universal usually means something objective, which is why I don't agree with this term. Like a universal is something objective, like universals. And Buddhism doesn't talk about universals. It doesn't accept universals. It doesn't accept like an objective, whatever, cow hood somewhere in space. There's actually a very nice video I'm going to share with you in the Lorig group that you might find interesting. It's about numbers. It's about numbers. How do numbers exist? There are three views. Numbers, there's the Platonian view of numbers, there's the nominal view of numbers, and there's the fictional view of numbers. The Platonian means there's one somewhere in space, like a universal we call one, and therefore we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The nominal view is the view that because you have two pencils, you have two. If you have two objects, right? You have two objects, therefore you can say two. Oops. It does that again. So it's got, you've got two things of something. So the way you teach a child how to count, and that's the nominal view. And the fictional view is the view that there are no numbers. We just made them up. And that's such a beautiful explanation because, well, what do you think is the Buddhist view of those three? Platonian, nominal, or fictional?
Fictional.
Nominal.
Nominal. It's nominal. The Platonian of like a universal, that is the extreme of reification.
Reification.
Fictionalism, there are no numbers, view of nihilism. That's so beautiful. So this philosophy of numbers, and when we think about emptiness, and of course I'm again sidetracking here, but everything that we're learning is really about understanding emptiness. And we shouldn't just think of objects such as, I don't know, tables and chairs and chairs and tables and, what about numbers? Our sense of the existence of numbers. Is there an inherently one, inherently two? So this video, I think, is quite nice. I don't know if you like it, you can always ignore it. But I thought I'd share it with you because I really think it's interesting. It's pretty short. It's got nothing to do with Buddhism, by the way. It's just this I don't know, this mathematician that talks about it. So going back to this here, therefore, so like universals, if you believe phenomena exist inherently, then it makes sense that you have this absolute tableness somewhere, kind of like something that exists on its own somewhere in space. And in this case, they talk about something permanent. So it's something objective as well. Whereas in Buddhism, a generality, yes, it does exist. We talk about vas in general, we talk about part in general, but there's nothing subjective and it's nothing objective. It's totally subjective. Whereas a generality, the way it appears to our conceptual mind, that's something subjective, which is why, again, another reason why I would not use the word universal. in the context of the meaning generality. But here it's good to use the word universal. So a cowhood, some permanent entity that is established altogether separately from the two particular cows. For the Buddhists, the linguistic convention is applied on the basis of the capacity to give rise naturally to a cognition of resemblance, having seen a white cow and a black cow, and likewise on the basis of the two cows similarly performing the function of a cow, in that they create a similar effect. Right? That's why, from Buddhist point of view, even in the lower schools, there's no absolute kind of universal somewhere in space or wherever. But instead, yes, it's because of that cognition of a resemblance, of a similarity, having seen a white cow and then a black cow, and likewise on the basis of the two cows similarly performing the function of a cow, in that they create a similar effect. Applying the linguistic convention in this way accounts for the ability to think this is a cow, when later another cow is seen. And that's labeling. So beautifully, the Sautrantika school is actually here introducing us to labeling, without saying phenomena are merely labeled and so forth. But it's already saying that we just basically, because of that resemblance, we have the thought, this is a cow. And in the Prasangika school, the thought, this is a cow, is labeling. You label the moment you think, this is a cow. That's why we're constantly labeling. This is this. I want this. I don't want that. I'm like this. I'm not like that. Constantly labeling. Thus, according to Buddhist epistemologists, when this cognition of the universal is deeply investigated, it is actually posited to be a cognition of resemblance. Just, having something in common. Furthermore, this cognition of the resemblance of phenomena of similar type or of a similar type arises from our innate latent predispositions. So it's these imprints we have to see similarities, to try to categorize things, to make sense of the world. I mean, when we were born, we try to make sense of the things around us. It's these imprints we've carried with our minds since beginning this time, which is why language, of course, makes sense. We make sense of the world. We see similarities and apply certain terminologies or certain terms. We apply certain terminology or certain terms. So in the sense that it doesn't exist from the side of the object, it's totally up to us. Furthermore, this cognition of the resemblance of phenomena of a similar type arises from our innate latent predispositions. In the case of the linguistic convention pot and the referent pot, in no way do they posit an objective relation between language and its referent. Right? So this is so interesting. This is so interesting how, well, as I said before, not only do we have a sense of inherently existent I and inherently existent, what have you, like vases and numbers and so forth, we also have an inherently existent sense of the meaning of a word. And Maya, you know the story I'm going to tell you now. But I became aware of that, or it became, it became very obvious in a particular case when I was sitting with a friend in Israel in a restaurant, and I wasn't really hungry. My friend was, so we were going through the menu, and she was busy like looking at these words, at the different dishes, and there was one dish called shakshuka. And I said, "Oh, that is such a beautiful word. If I had a daughter, I'd call her shakshuka." And that is so ridiculous because shakshuka is a dish. But the thing was, to me, it just sounded nice. To me, it didn't mean anything. But that's like calling someone samosa or calling someone paranta or calling someone palak paneer or whatever. I mean, it sounds so ridiculous because it seems to have that inherent meaning.
Yeah.
But in that moment, because I think the Hebrew name Shoshana is really beautiful, which I've been told is very old-fashioned, but I don't have that sense. So Shakshuka, Shoshana, kind of sounded similar. And in both cases, I thought was a pretty girl's name. And then, of course, I was reminded when my siblings, when they started calling their children, giving them names like Matilda and Olivia, and I was like, oh, no, oh, that's such an old-fashioned name, as if there was something intrinsic in the name being old-fashioned or fashion itself. Now, I'm not talking to the ordained people. Well, honestly, I've over the years being a nun, I've seen there is fashion. The colors, there's different shades of maroon, and then there's lighter maroon, and there's darker maroon, and the fashion even changes there, but not as rapidly. But the point is, like, like when you see fashion changing and something that you believe to be really beautiful one year, and then the next year you feel, oh, it's so old-fashioned. It seems to be something intrinsic in the object, some intrinsic fashionableness or intrinsic non-fashionableness. This is all part of recognizing how things seem to have, from their own side, seem to have an existence from its own side. So it's not restricted to vases and tables being intrinsically a table and so forth. It also refers to names, for instance. What makes a particular name old-fashioned, or what makes a particular name the name of a dish and not a name of a girl? Of course, it's mere conventions, but here it's said very beautifully in this way. In no way does the linguistic convention and the referent posit an objective relation. That's also merely labeled between language and its referent. Such a relation comes about solely through the capacity of, customary classificatory conventions. Thus, they maintain that language indicating its referent is highly contingent on what the speaker wishes to say. All right, so here wish referring to the wish to say something in the case of a linguistic in the case of a linguistic convention, okay, but then what about a conceptual mind? The wish to think about something? All right, or the wish to see something, then we go back to the collective engager. Anyway, regarding this theory of exclusion and linguistic reference, the masters of Buddhist epistemology, Dignaga and Dharmakirti, made an incomparable contribution to philosophy in general, and particularly to classical Indian philosophy. We will discuss this in greater detail in Volume 4. Okay, great. Done. Even on time, almost. Okay, so we're done with we are done with all the different divisions, the twofold divisions, including collective and eliminative engagers. Next would actually be mind and mental factors, but I think it's better to do that at the very end. To do it at the very end. That's how we usually do it. But we also study the 7 types of awareness first. So we get them out of the way, and then at the very end we study mind and mental factors. So I would suggest we do the same for Monday. Monday we start with the objects of the mind. Where is that? How the mind engages its object. Yeah, that's chapter 17. We'll start with that and go through this all the way up to the 7 types of mind. And once we're done with that, we'll do mind and mental factors. And not everything, and we can't go through everything, but we don't need to. Just the most important aspects of mind and mental factor. Great. Okay.
Having thoroughly investigated in accord with all that I have heard, day and night with the 4 reasonings, my own of reflection on these topics of contemplation, may this discernment sever all doubts.
All right. Thank you, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, Ishana.